With this, we come to today's monsoon musing lecture 2. Ladies and gentlemen, leadership is an essential aspect of any organization's progress. The Indian Navy has shown remarkable growth and development from 1947 to present times under the leadership of naval icons who've been prominent even today in imparting leadership lessons to us. Our guest speaker for today, Commodore Dr. Srikant Kesnur, VSM, will speak of personalities in the naval domain who have shown sound leadership at tactical, operational, and strategic levels. By using instances from the life of Admiral RL Pereira and other naval chiefs, flag officers, leaders, and iconic figures, Commodore Srikant Kesnur will build a connect with the current generation of naval personnel with several inspiring examples. Commodore Dr. Srikant Kesnur is an alumnus of the prestigious National Defence Academy, Khadakwasla, and was commissioned in the Indian Navy in July 1986. He is a specialist in naval communications and electronic warfare. In his 36 years of naval service, he has had extensive experience in maritime operations, training, leadership, diplomacy, and administration. He has been the commanding officer of 2 frontline ships, INS Vindhyagiri and INS Jalashwa. He was a defense advisor at the High Commission of India based in Nairobi, Kenya from October 2008 to March 2012, with East Africa as his area of responsibility. He has shaped young minds as faculty at the National Defence Academy, Pune, Defence Service Staff College, Wellington, and the Naval War College, Goa. Apart from 5 postgraduate degrees, he has a PhD from the University of Mumbai in Science and Social Sciences. He has been involved in several academic, creative, corporate, outreach endeavors of the Navy, which include ideating and contributing to Navy's museum and memorial initiatives. He was conferred with the Vishisht Seva Medal VSM in 2021. He has been at the forefront of popularizing naval history through articles, comics, books, talk shows, and other initiatives. Post-retirement, he continues to write frequently on military and maritime issues. He describes himself as a maritime evangelist. Today, as he is set to talk about the leadership lessons one needs to learn from the Indian naval icons, he too is a leader to many, including to all of us here at MHS. I request Commodore Dr. Srikant Kesnur to please grace the stage.
Good evening, Admiral Somasundaram, Admiral Shekhawat, Admiral Rao, Admiral Kunal Rajkumar, Admiral Vinod Kumar, venerable veterans, directors, senior officers, officers in charge, commanding officers, members of the media, ladies, and good to see a lot of ladies today for this MHS talk, and gentlemen. Good evening once again. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Maritime History Society. First of all, thanks to Western Naval Command and to Maritime History Society for inviting me to deliver this talk. In many ways, my maritime history journey began at MHS or with MHS more than 30 years ago, when I was one of the young officers who are nominated to attend such talks. You're compulsorily shanghaied from your ship and sent, and it was one such talk that led, of course, I was always interested in history, but one such talk that made me more curious about maritime aspects and so many other things. So I have always described myself as a faithful foot soldier of the Maritime History Society, because over the last 30 years, beginning with several curators and above all the distinguished Admiral Ravati and Admiral Fauji Nadkarni, there are lots of interactions that happen with them. So I'm so thrilled, but more than thrilled, I believe it's my honor and privilege to be able to give this talk and have some exchanges. So I will begin, ladies and gentlemen, with what I call as 3 caveats and 2 drivers. And what are these? The first caveat is everything that I say is my opinion only. This is not the opinion of the Maritime History Society or of the Indian Navy. It's of course informed by my experiences and by my interactions, but right, wrong, imperfect, these are my views. The second, when I use phrases or nicknames or affectionate terms, or as people would say, of calling Ronnie or Podgy or Mickey or something like that for our senior officers, it's not with any disrespect. If I don't use their ranks as prefix, it's not with any disrespect. It is in fact with the highest respect and affection. I believe that they have transcended the need for having ranks as their prefixes, and they stand by themselves for what they did. So I mean no disrespect when I use nicknames and what are called Dakna in Bengali. I also seek the indulgence of senior officers, veterans and flag officers here, because it's possible that you know a lot of what I'm saying, and it's also possible that you have seen it differently, but considering the profile of the largely young audience, I'm going to pitch the ball to them. So please, I seek your indulgence. The third caveat is the most important, ladies and gentlemen, and it is this, that writing or making an opinion in history is often about the most difficult thing, because you can be accused of bias, you can be accused of selectivity, you can be accused of not having enough sources. And in military history particularly, it's even more difficult in Indian military history, because there are no great primary sources that you have to rely on. You often rely on oral sources, you rely on written stuff, much of that is hagiographies. So there is a problem if you have to unpack history at a very serious level in Indian naval history and in military history as a whole. And within that, if you have to choose a small slice of life and talk about leaders and leadership, and you have to fit all that in 45 minutes to 1 hour, please remember that any sort of granular analysis is not possible. Also remember that I will, one way or the other, be biased, be selective, leave out something, not cover something. And most importantly, these are value judgments, and value judgments can go wrong. I'll be happy to be critiqued for that. In fact, it would indicate to me that people are getting interested in this subject. So please bring them on. Let your arrows fly during the question answers. I'll be very, very happy about that. So these are the three caveats that I start off. And what are the two drivers? Now these are the two drivers that like I said, are largely of my life, what has inspired me, what has propelled me. That my life's interests have revolved around three subjects: history, media and popular culture. So that has obsessed me all along. That is the lens with which I view things. That is the way I try to analyze aspects in life, and that is the outlook and perspective I take of things that are happening around me. So therefore it was natural to fit naval history into those lens of, say, public culture and media and history, and see how it is taught, learned, absorbed. So that was the first driver. The second one, and this is interesting, more immediate, was this great puzzle in my mind. You see, the Indian Navy has done excellently well when it comes to bringing out formal histories. We brought out 7 volumes of formal history covering the entire time from 1947 to 2020. Very good. But when it comes to informal, popular history, when it comes to study of heroes, when it comes to study of various other ways in which the Navy can catch the imagination of people, we are nowhere there. We take our tab of silent service far too seriously. So this is a country, if you take a quiz, everyone will tell you who was the Navy chief who was the Army chief in 71 war. But nobody will tell you who was the Navy chief in 71 war. So we have a problem here, and I will be telling various aspects of that problem. And I myself saw that, as a young officer on board an SNF doing my watchkeeping, I was discouraged from reading naval history book, or discouraged from reading the first edition of Quarterdeck had come out, and I was fascinated by that. But I was shooed out of the wardroom because watchkeeping sub-lieutenants don't frequent wardrooms in SNFs, at least in those days. You know, so it was funny to me that you're being discouraged from studying your own history, and to me that's a kind of riddle I have sort of straddled through lots of my life. I still can't explain. So the driver of this talk is this, that there is no doubt that Ronnie was huge, he was iconic. But Ronnie will be the last man himself to claim that he was the only leader in the Navy. And yet today when you talk about the Navy outside, recently when I did a conversation on Sam Monitor and Ronnie, some people replied, sir बस करो, कितना बोलोगे Ronnie के बारे में, ऐसा लग रहा है कि Navy में और कोई नहीं है. You know? So it seems that in 75 years the Navy has produced two heroes in Ronnie Pereira and Captain Malla, and done one action in attack of Karachi. That's all that the general public knows about what the Indian Navy has done. Now if you actually study, you say, but what the hell? So many other things have happened. Now if so many other things have happened, someone has made it possible. So who are those people? So that is going to be my theme for today. But we will begin with Ronnie. Obviously it is his centenary year, and we need to talk about him. And this is, who is Paddy? This is Professor Padmanabhan, my maths teacher in NDA. Someone whom I hold as my great guru, my inspiration. And when I told him that I am giving a talk on about Ronnie, he sent this. He is 90 plus, old man, and he says, I got up from the chair, but accept my salute to Ronnie and share this with others. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Padmanabhan was in NDA, and he says nicely that I used to be called Pads or Paddy by Ronnie, which is why I've used that name, Paddy. No? So why does a professor, he is, Padmanabhan is a classic Tambram, nerdy, studious, maths professor, probably, would be far away from a chain-smoking, flamboyant, full-throated laughter Ronnie Pereira. Yet what is it that attracted these two people? What is it that made Padmanabhan, Professor Padmanabhan, love Ronnie so much? And that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm illustrating that to talk about the different ways in which this gentleman, Admiral Ronnie Pereira, our 10th Navy Chief. Now the skeletal framework, most of you are aware, he was a Navy Chief from 79 to 82, 1st March 79 to 1st March or 28 Feb 82, commissioned in 43, born on in May 23, commissioned in 43, saw a bit of war action on small ships. Thereafter, he commanded Qatar, he commanded the INS Delhi, was DEPCOM in NDA, made a lot of difference to lots of people. Then went at Eastern Fleet Commander, then came in as CNC Southern Naval Area, Western Naval Command, Vice Chief of Naval Staff, and then ultimately became the CNS. But that's just the skeletal framework. It's the sort of boxes that any officer on his way up will tick. What are the core features? Why was this man the biggest inspiration? Why did an opinion poll in 1989 rank where almost all young officers in the Navy said he is our inspiration, 7 years after Ronnie had retired, So that is what we got to see. There must be some answer to that. Why? Now, the answer, look, I didn't meet Ronnie. I never met Ronnie. I never interacted with him. So I get my data from books and articles about him, from what other people have told about him. The closest I have got to Ronnie is a long session with Bhaskar Sen, B.R. Sen, who was his flight lieutenant. When Sen, Commodore Sen, the late Commodore Sen, was CSO in Goa and as commanding Vindhyagiri, so we spent a long time together, and a little bit of interaction with Colonel Chatterjee, the son of Monty Chatterjee, who was the secretary to Ronnie when he was a chief. But that's obviously not enough, so we got to go with what we have. And from what I've studied, there are 3 or 4 things, and I asked a lot of people, including Admiral Avati, about Ronnie. He says, and even recently Captain Mohan Ram, that deep, absolute, almost fanatical love for nation and navy. And you know, it was not a triumphal, not a jingoistic kind of love. It was a deep love, particularly for the navy. I mean, it's the sort of love that if you had removed Ronnie from the navy, he would, or from the forge, he would feel very, very lost. The highest sense of moral probity and financial integrity, and extremely austere. Admiral Avati, himself a great icon, told me, he says, Ronnie was impossibly austere. You know, so these are some of the things that sort of define Ronnie. And extremely, I think as a personality, tall, handsome, very good looking, you know, great deep baritone in the way he spoke. I believe when he laughed, everyone talks about his deep-throated laughter as though, you know, the way Barbosa describes it as 1,000 stars sort of exploding together. So that was in many ways Ronnie. Did he have weaknesses? You bet he had. He had a lot of weaknesses, and I think he accepted some of them himself. His very, very short temper, would fly off a handle. He had very, very colorful vocabulary. It would be a strict no-no used today. He had rather conventional views on many things which would be politically incorrect today. Most importantly, people say that he was thoda bahut given, because of his instinctiveness, wo jo bolte hain kaan ka kaccha, that he used to be occasionally kaan ka kaccha, follow. But I think the good part about Ronnie was he himself would accept what are the problems with me. He would often do a debrief of his own ship handling, how he did things, what he did. You know. What are the other aspects? He was a very, very Dotty Fighter. He had an accident in the early 50s on board one of the ships when he had taken gunnery students for a class, and you know, there had been a misfire. In the clearing of the misfire drill, there was a cooker explosion, and his entire left hand, in fact he had a crooked left elbow throughout his career for that region. He almost smashed. If it had not been for the civil surgeon, he might have had to amputate that hand. Then he had tuberculosis in the late 50s as a commander, XO Delhi. He was in sanatorium for a long time, almost a year, came back. He had scooter accident after his retirement, a big one in Bangalore, a smaller one in Wellington, and then towards the end of his life he was, afflicted by cancer. And each of these he sort of fought. He was a very Dotty fighter. He came back, you know, his first reaction when he had that, I told you, politically incorrect, when he had that explosion in the gun, his first reaction was to lean back against the bulkhead and ask for a cigarette, you know. So that was Ronnie in many ways. But now, very interestingly for young officers and sailors, Ronnie didn't have a glamorous path to his service career. You know, if you see his things, in World War also he fought on what are called the expendables, you know, the MDLs, the small ships which are the equivalent of STBs, SUs, even probably smaller than that, FICs. His war career was that. Thereafter, much of it, he did only one foreign tenure, his long G in UK. He was not NA anywhere. He didn't go as flag lieutenant, staff officer. He didn't do any glamorous courses. He was, I mean, he came to Delhi first, I think, as XO or as a squadron gunnery officer. His appointments were staff officer gunnery, drafting commander, XO Angre, the sort of jobs which might be regarded as unsexy. But how he came through all that and how he consistently performed and did, I think that's a very, very important lesson. And he did it because he felt bad when he did his long G and came and he was not put on a ship. He made an application that I want to go on a ship. But he worked very hard as a staff officer gunnery. So these are some important aspects about him. Huge amount of care, concern for shipmates. I think he was known for the compassion that he showed to people. He was known for that, and huge amount of care that he took. There are several incidents where he would reach out. The Pereiras were childless. They used to address most people, young officers as son, cadets in NDA as son. So there was a kind of, fatherly or paternal instinct that would come out when they saw young people. And there are many instances of their care. Even when he punished people in NDA or something, it was to reform and not to relegate them as he often led by example. Wherever anything had to be done in NDA, he would be there all over. He was omnipresent. On the ship, he was omnipresent. If some paint scheme had to be illustrated, he would tell the seaman, "Aisa paint karna hai, aisa nahi." So there were things he did, particularly with seamanship. He was a field man. He hated, I think, desk jobs. He was out there in front, and he was a great sports person. A very Navy level hockey player, fantastic golf player, good swimmer. He was very, very good in sports, and indeed so was his wife, Phyllis. He had, ladies and gentlemen, a very unique code of conduct. Often, just give all his pilotage money to young officers. Or, in NDA, punish a guy, but then ensure that when he comes back, there is khana, pina, lemonade, everything. So it was like, okay, on one hand I dole you punishments, on the other hand I invite you home. He was that sort of a person, a very unique code. At the same time, he himself admitted he was not tech savvy. He didn't understand too much of technology. He was not very great with file work. He was not very good. If you ask Captain Mohan Ram, he'll say he was not very good at dealing with bureaucrats, but that's a different issue. He's certainly not a reputed ship handler, though he tried his best. And in those days, ship handling was a very, very important thing. Having said that, I think, given the constraints of time, what was his life and legacy? And we need to understand that. It is wrong to pigeonhole him and say that because he was this, he was an inspirational leader and did nothing much. In fact, as the chief and elsewhere, he was bent on consolidation, as his biographer brings out. He wanted to make sure, at the end of the day, every chief wants to make sure that they have a good fighting navy during their watch, while also preparing for the future. Administratively, the AFNHB happened during his time. He gave a push for it. The biggest aspect which we all sort of thank ourselves today, entitled rations, Pereira fought for it. He fought hugely. He fought the establishment. He convinced the Prime Minister. And also he fought counter views which said that we must get it in money instead of kind. And he was a great one for saying your cash will depreciate, value will depreciate, some bureaucrat will shut that wall, so keep it in kind. And I think history has borne him out much better. He had a big role to play in enhancement of accommodation. His fanatical insistence that young officers wear helmet. Often he would chase people, catch them, punish them for not wearing helmet. So that has resulted today, I think, in helmets being ubiquitous across the Navy. It's a rule, everyone follows, and I think it's for the better, we all realize it. Operationally, the intake in which I served for memorable almost 3 years was created during his time. He had that, great bent of mind for tactical gunnery aspect. So weapon analysis, the fleet analysis unit became wow. Lot of, despite being not a man who understood or who loved technology, he gave huge amount of support to the APSO project, and we'll hear what Paul Raj has to say. Seabird project owes a great deal to him, and the procurement of Sea Harriers and HTW submarines when he wanted to move away from the Russians towards the West owes a little bit to him. There too he made some mistakes. He was late, or he was not enthusiastic about nuclear submarine, and I think that probably history will bear out that he was probably, whatever his reasons, that maybe he was wrong in retrospect. He was not too enthusiastic about getting involved in the integrated missile development project. He thought it was a DRDO track to take, ploy to take more people from the Navy and deprive him of few people. So he was not too enthusiastic. Maybe history would judge him to be a little in error there. But above all, I think his unique brand was the force of his personality. The force of his personality which would come through wherever he was someone who immediately you could not be indifferent to him. You could never be indifferent to him. You are attracted. You sometimes were afraid, but you could not say that you would not notice such a person. I think he had a way of compelling or demanding attention of everyone present around him. There are lots of examples galore, and I don't want to take all of the talk with that. We got to come to part 2. But examples, as I say, everyone has a Ronnie story. And that's interesting. You talk to everyone, they say, and the 2 books, while they contain a lot, still don't contain so many Ronnie stories. And maybe many people know, but because there are young people here, I will bring out 2 or 3 instances. One is, in the early 80s, he had an appointment with Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. तो वो जा रहे थे रास्ते पे उन्होंने देखा कि there is one young man with an old person on his shoulder walking on the road and in pain. The old man was in pain. So he stopped his car. He inquired. The young man says, my father is old. He has to be taken to the hospital, but I have no money to take a rickshaw letter or an ambulance. So Ronnie takes the 2, drives them both against the protest of his flag lieutenant who says you have an appointment with the Prime Minister. And remember, Indira Gandhi was an imperious person herself. And so Ronnie goes, gets them admitted to AIMS, says look after them, uses the force of his uniform, and then goes to the Prime Minister's house. Now we don't know what happened after that. There is a little bit of a fairy tale story about he telling I like my egg sunny side up. But that I think is a bit of an exaggeration. But whatever it is, he sort of could stand for what was right or what he felt right at that time, and never mind if he had to go late for an appointment with the Prime Minister. Showed lots of courage and compassion. The second thing, and this would interest, instance है INS दिल्ली का boat pulling team, पुराना INS दिल्ली. उन दिनों दिल्ली, मैसूर, aircraft carrier विक्रांत में बहुत competition होता था for boat pulling regatta, and it used to happen in Kochi. So in 1967, Ronnie is commanding Delhi. In 1967, Delhi wins the regatta comfortably. So he wants to win again in 1968, and the first 2 races Delhi wins. So it's on the way to getting the cock. In the third race, there is a problem. Delhi sailors come first, but this is an engine room and miscellaneous crew. They have unfortunately rowed in the wrong race, which means it was a crew that rowed in the wrong group. So from being first, they were disqualified, which means your entire points go away. And you had no crew left for the next race, which was supposed to be their race. So the story goes that Ronnie goes down, they are watching it from Mysore, he goes down the quarterdeck of Mysore to the cackle of Mysore soldiers. So Hugh and Colin Ganser describe in their book on the Delhi. But he goes in his boat, tells something to the sailors of Delhi. One doesn't know what he does. Ronnie says, I just told them the honor of Delhi is in your hands. Now the same crew, ladies and gentlemen, आप जानते हैं कि एक बार बोट पुलिंग होने के बाद कितना आपका पूरा एनर्जी ड्रेन होता है. वही टीम वापस जाती है दोबारा रेस करने के लिए 4th रेस में, और वो फिर फर्स्ट आती है. So they beat a fresh team of other ships and come first again, and that is really huge. Admiral Adm Chatterjee is there, the Chief of Naval Staff, and when he gives the cock to Ronnie, he says, this is a great national leader. Chatterjee was very, very, of course, impressed by Ronnie, and so did Ronnie regard Chatterjee as his role model. So these are some great stories of how, imagine coming first, the second time over again. NDA, there are many stories, gentlemen, ladies, of arranging movies, pattern, but the most important thing was, as I said, he would give punishments for reform. So once when he came to know that someone is getting relegated because of his punishment, he immediately called the Saab and said, scratch them off the official record. So often he would save people who are being relegated. And he didn't mind a challenge. एक बार उन्होंने स्क्वाड्रन में गए, उनको ये करना था, चेक करना था. One smart cadet immediately who was being caught came out, wore a khaki, this one put a cap, behaved that he was a civilian bearer or the orderly. Ronnie caught him. He said, that's a smart trick, but I'll let you go because you are smart in your thinking. Now these are some of the things that was very unique to know. Commodore Paul Raj told me a very interesting story about Ronnie, and this is after his retirement. Paul Raj said that, look, what Ronnie did for encouragement to APSO is well known. But after Ronnie had retired and Paul Raj was still serving, Paul Raj went to meet him in his house in Bangalore at last. So when he went by scooter, and when Ronnie found out, mind you, Ronnie after retirement himself had a scooter. He had no savings for a car or anything like that. So Paul Raj, when he went to his house and Ronnie found he had come without in a scooter, he sent him back saying, you are an important scientist, you are too important a man to be risking your life on scooter. He hailed an auto rickshaw. Paul Raj didn't have money. He gave the money to the auto rickshaw guy and sent Paul Raj. So when he said, how do I get my scooter back? He says, don't worry. Next day, Ronnie lands up at Paul Raj's house with another guy to return the scooter, and Ronnie has come on his scooter. So now this is, and this Paul Raj told me himself, it is there in the book, but he told me himself last year when I met him. Yesterday, and I really missed meeting him. I understand he was in the command mess. But these are remarkable, As indeed, I think Commodore Mike Barra told me an interesting story on playing golf in DSSC, that how when in a 4-ball they bet Pereira and took money from him, the army DS who was with them didn't believe it, because in the army you don't take money from your senior officers. So these were some of the very interesting things about Ronnie, and I think you can fill up a whole book about what he did and what he didn't. But we must also acknowledge what Phyllis, his better half, did. A great lady, someone who was always by his side, someone equally talented, someone just as compassionate. I think Ronnie would be half the person he was without Phyllis. We can't, unfortunately, constraints of time don't allow us to talk too much. But this is what Commodore Paul Raj said about Ronnie in the 2015 Pereira Memorial talk. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to note one thing. Commodore Paul Raj is a professor in Stanford. He doesn't need Navy. Yet why does he say, a word famous scientist, say, I am proud to have served in the Indian Navy? Why does he say great deal of pride and satisfaction? And do we feel the same sense of pride and satisfaction about our Navy, which is my part 2 of my theme, And this part 2 is, how do we conceive our Navy? What do we think the navies do? Do we think it defends boundaries, as some civilian people would say, or media people would say, defend the coastline? Do we think it defends maritime interests, as many experts would say? Look at here is someone saying the US Navy preserves the international liberal order. Here is someone saying the US Navy is responsible for the greatest increase in global prosperity. Now, unless we start thinking of navies that way, unless we have a sense of destiny about what navies can do, I think we miss the woods for trees in design. Now, funnily enough, our Navy has, my study of history tells me, has done that. And I'll do a quick 5-minute slideshow about various things before talking about other leaders. This is a very famous historical photograph, 3 prime ministers in one ship, INS Delhi, June 1950, when Panditji went to Indonesia. Of course, he didn't make the statement at that time. He said it at some other time. Look at what Sardar Patel says. Sardar Patel, in fact, incidentally, it's a misnomer that Indira Gandhi was the first lady to have sailed on the old INS Delhi. It was Sardar's daughter, Mani Ben, who bet Indira Gandhi by a month. She sailed with the Sardar in May 1950. So Patel also says, we need a strong navy. Very, very interesting photograph. I found it fascinating. Two worlds meeting. A political leader born out of freedom movement. He is stealing the charkha on the forecastle of Delhi. And these are these two young navy officers watching him with fascination, wondering, ye kya ho raha hai? Now this was the interface between the navy and the nation. There was a political will. I'm cutting it down. There are lots of other quotes that I have of Panikkar, of Mickey Roy. But despite that, ladies and gentlemen, what happened is the Navy suffered from budgetary constraints. Navy didn't get priority. Our national outlook was continental. And yet, what is fascinating is that the Navy has actually grown. There is a book called India Grows at Night by Gurcharan Singh, Gurcharan Das, where he talks of how India has grown at night, despite government rules and bottlenecks and bureaucratic, what is called regulatory cholesterol and all that, because he says essential Indian entrepreneurial skills brought India up. It's much the same way I would argue about the Indian Navy, and this is exactly what Harsh Pant says. The maritime dimension did not figure, and yet despite that, the Indian Navy was largely successful. How were we successful? Someone must have done something, right? Who is that someone? Now look at this. We are all very proud last September when Vikrant was commissioned. Building an aircraft carrier is the holy grail of shipbuilding. But when did our aircraft carrier journey start? In 1961. 1961 is 14 years after your independence. You were a sloop navy till independence. What audacity of thought was there that our planners said will become a carrier navy? Now there are very interesting things when we got the aircraft carrier, right? We sent our crew there. Mountbatten tells Admiral Katari that, look, you guys don't have experience about aircraft carrier operations. Why don't you take a British captain till you go to Bombay, and then he hands over to the Indian captain, Peter P.S. Mahindru. And when Katari tells that to Peter Mahindru, Mahindru tells him, sir, with the highest regard, there can be only one captain on board a ship. And hats off to Katari, he accepts and respects that opinion. Right? This when nobody had experience of carrier operations in the Indian Navy, apart from a few who had seen a bit of that in World War II. Now what happens? And listen to what Admiral John Treacher, then he is a commander, he is the only Britisher, he was the commander air on HMS Victorious, and he is loaned to the Indian Navy. He says good things about everyone. Peter Mahindru, about Ryan Singh, the commander air, about the flyers, Balbir Law, about Gigi Gupta, and he showers praise on Stan Dawson, the navigating officer. He says, look, what a fantastic job the man did. And he tells an interesting incident. This is the Britisher saying, first time I go and tell the captain, look, when I say I'm ready to launch the aircraft at so and so time, you must have the ship facing into the wind at so and so time. He says, Mahindru heard me out, said okay. He says 2 days later, the ship was facing the right place. When I didn't launch the aircraft in time, he came and told me, next time when I have the ship ready, please remember to launch your aircraft in time. Now this is attitude. This is being gutsy, ladies and gentlemen. This was the first aircraft carrier captain. So if you are able today to build aircraft carriers, it's because you started operating aircraft carriers. Look at other countries who had the same experiment. Thailand, Brazil. They didn't really make it. So there must be something good about us, right? 65 war, we were denied a piece of action, right? Admiral Nanda told, next opportunity comes, we'll make a bonfire. Oh. Look at how the Navy grew between 65 and 71. Look at what Admiral Chatterjee said in 68 when, British went west of Suez. Chatterjee was pulled up by his own Defence Minister, Swaran Singh. But history has borne Chatterjee. Today when we say we are the first responder or the preferred security partner, it's exactly what Chatterjee was saying, except that he was saying it in the language of that day. Therefore, if we had a ringside seat in the surrender ceremony with Krishnan there, it was because the Navy did a lot during the interwar years and elsewhere. I also am flashing this picture, ladies and gentlemen. इसमें एक quiz question है जो that officer who is peering next to Major General Jacob, the one who is the young officer. Any idea who he is? One Flight Lieutenant Krishnamurthy, who flew General Arora to the surrender ceremony from Calcutta. And legend has it that Arora didn't have a pen to sign, so he borrowed the pen of Krishnamurthy, which was used for the surrender certificate. Wing Commander retired Krishnamurthy stays here in Powai, and you will be happy to know that his son is a serving Navy officer posted as DS in Wellington. So these are good Navy quiz pieces. So why I'm telling you, now you come to late 80s, your involvement in Op Power, your involvement in Malay immediately gets you the Super India. And Super India is a military power, there's an indigenous Godavari class shown, not the aircraft carrier. So those guys know what is the currency of power. Another 30 years later, I mean, I love it when Tarangini, a sailing ship, goes to London 75 years of independence. You're actually telling the British that, 500 years you came to our land in sailing ships, now we'll send sailing ships to you. And for good measure, the planners made sure that Tarangini visited Lisbon too. So there must be, I don't know, design default, the Navy seems to be doing rather well. We are also providing public good through information fusion systems. Now, if we are doing all that, and I am trying to say, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a continuum. It's not about, one leader, one Navy chief, one party. Then there must be some leaders who must have done extraordinarily well. And that is my last 15-20 minutes of talk. What is this factor leadership? And I believe that there's lots to talk about that, but I'll limit myself. So there are different kind of leaders, heroes and icons. I'm not touching adventurers, explorers and sportspersons because the Navy has produced a huge amount of them. Recently, what am I trying to tell, ladies and gentlemen? I'm trying to say this is a Navy that's produced a world-class scientist. This is a Navy that builds aircraft carrier. This is a Navy whose officers top all the courses that go abroad. This is a Navy which has produced a sailor who has come second in the Golden Globe race. His other competitors were not necessarily ex-Navy officers. But now I'm not doing Mehul Karnik's job. I'm not the PRO for the Navy. But I just see that there is an interesting trend here. And this is a trend of a Navy that's doing well. So, who is then responsible for the Navy having done well? So, I am only taking those top 2-3 categories. This gentleman was the first gallantry award winner of the Navy. A Topaz. Ashok Chakra 3rd class comes to Shaurya Chakra equivalent now. In 1952, a young lad from Mathura. And there's an interesting sociological tale here, An uneducated person comes on board Delhi from Mathura, landlocked but great swimmer. He rescues 10 people when the ship is docked in Kolkata. And this man, he looking through his documents is fascinating. He retired in 59, joined the Central Excise Service later. And in 1980s was writing back to the Navy saying, please send a certificate of my service because I believe it counts towards pension. So some things don't change. But the interesting part is, look, isn't this a fantastic tale? This is the Navy's first gallantry award winner. So, chiefs, and I believe each of these chiefs needs independent study by themselves, but we don't have the time. Each of them. I have written in detail about Admiral Adhar Chatterjee. He is personally my favorite because he was a huge thinking person, intellectual. But each of these, Admiral Katari, in setting standards, in ensuring that a navy that was just born had to have a certain cosmopolitan attitude, get over the problems of partition, get over the problems of the naval uprising, start afresh all over again. Admiral Soman, a great advocate for indigenization. Chatterjee, the man who lost his voice, as we say, he was the first 4-star admiral, thinker, doer, man parts. Nanda, the man who bombed Karachi. Why I must spend some time on Admiral Nanda is this. Ladies and gentlemen, let us accept that some of the things that happened after his retirement cast a shadow on his legacy. It is beyond my terms of remit to judge on the merits of those controversies. So, for the record, he has been exonerated or whatever by the courts. But there is no doubt that they sort of cast a shadow over his legacy. But does that mean we in the Navy sort of don't acknowledge the huge role he did as the admiral who led us in 71 war? I mean, he was the only sort of guy who could have got that, as Sandeep Punithan describes him, he's the Big Mac guy. Here was, Captain Mohan Ram says only Nanda could have done it. Given the clearance for aircraft carrier to be deployed, the Karachi attack was his idea, Operation X, deploying the commandos was his ideas. They too, of course, he did mistakes. I mean, the submariners have a peeve that he had rather restrictive terms of engagement in the 71 war for them. But I'm suggesting that, this is a man who needs greater acknowledgement. And people often talk of Ronnie and Nanda as two opposite ends of the spectrum, because one was absolutely austere, the other was flamboyant. You would not talk of them in the same breath. But listen, it was Nanda who sees merits in Ronnie. It was Nanda's report on the ACR of Ronnie who says he's consistently good. Is Nanda as DCNS who writes a good report on Ronnie as DCPT? Is Nanda as a CNC who makes Ronnie in charge of the PFR here in 1969? Nanda knows where to pick up talent. Is Nanda as CNS who picks up Ronnie as the Eastern Fleet Commander? So the personalities may have been very different. But I think we got to give the due to each of these people, and all of them. Karsetji, the first hydrographer, the man down below with that eagle nose, we did a centenary ceremony for it. Stan Dawson, another remarkable character. I just spoke about him. The Seabird and INA owes much. So, I'm not talking about serving naval officers, ladies and gentlemen, because you need to have certain remove from time, and I don't want to sort of talk about serving, you're still serving. Other chiefs, we're fortunate to have Admiral Shekhawat with us here today. So all of them have done some wonderful work. Admiral Arun Prakash, who brought in lots of changes in many of the things that we're working on. So constraints of time precludes me from touching upon all of them. So I will talk about these 4 or 5 people. Incidentally, I must tell you an interesting story about Admiral Shekhawat, and not because he's here, it just came to me that he's a remarkable Renaissance man, writes very well. You must see his interview in the quarterdeck, I think, of 95, 96, or even the foreword to that Admiral I knew. Balla's book has been written by him, a remarkable foreword. But the nicest story I heard from him was from an Air Force officer called AVM Manmohan Bahadur, who says that I flew Admiral Shekhawat once in the hills, and he's a helicopter pilot who has done extensive time in Siachen. And Manmohan Bahadur says, I started to tell Admiral Shekhawat about the hill features here and there, you know. And after a while I came to know that he has climbed many of the hills in this region and he knows more about these peaks than I do, so I shut myself up. So these are some of the remarkable stories that you hear from many of the people, and this just came to me when I saw it, so I'm pretty... But some of these very interesting characters, ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Krishna DSC, the top left guy, remarkable World War II DSC. I regard Krishna as the Sagat Singh of Indian Army, of the Indian Navy. He is probably our great campaign leader. He was there in World War II, winning a DSC. He is there in Junagadh with that army troops. He is there in 61 in liberation of Diu. He is there in 71 as a CNC is, drawing the Ghazi, making all those plans. And I think it was the Jugalbandi between Nanda and Krishnan that took. Again, Krishna was not the sort of guy you would put on the same weighing scale as Pereira, right? Krishna had his own style. But I think remarkably, and Admiral Awati tells me that Krishna was the most brilliant officer that he had sort of met. And so then there is, of course, Awati himself, the man who was responsible for sailing. Today's successes of Abhilash and other people owe to him, to Dilip Donde. MHS is entirely sort of he's the father figure. Captain Malla, you all know, right? We have a hall dedicated after him. Please do read an exchange of correspondence between Malla's daughter about her father going down, written some years ago in the Indian Express, and an open letter reply by Commander Alan Rodrigues, or Captain Alan Rodrigues, who explained why did your father go down. It's remarkable. I think MHS should reprint that in one of your Sagardara publications. Paul Raj, great scientist, now ex-NDA. And why we must claim his success? He himself, of course, is thankful to the Navy, but because his scientific journey starts with devising an indigenous sonar. And then he goes on to do many other things later, and then today he is the father of MIMO technology, which is the heart of smartphones. So if today the whole world is using smartphones, they must thank an Indian Navy ex-NDA electrical officer Commodore, right? But do we look at it that way? Mickey Roy, the aviator submariner, first observer of the country, who is the father of the nuclear submarine program? No, I mean it may be an exaggeration to call him the Indian Recover, but look at this. He was an aviator, he was DNI, in classic DNI, as Sandeep Unitan says, a man who would not trust his own shadow. A perfect man to be a DNI during war. But then he is a thinker. And Mickey Roy brings in all of his thinking. Later is the father of the ATV project, which in turn gives birth to the nuclear submarine. And then of course Raja Menon, I'll talk about him in a bit. So I'm now flashing some of the names, ladies and gentlemen. Please, many of these would be Greek and Latin to you, some names may be known. I have described them as pioneers in generation 1.5. The pioneers I regard as those who were commissioned during war, pre-war, before 40s usually. The others, 1.5, took part in war, commissioned in the early or mid 40s. And generation 2 I take as from Tailiani and Nadkarni onwards, who were commissioned from 1950. And then an independent India. So we need to do a study, but many of them remarkable. VEC Barbosa, Vic Barbosa, just as austere as Ronnie, lived a most frugal life. He was called Master G, from Cannonade like Ronnie. And Barbosa refuses to take over from Ronnie as chief when there are intimations sent to him that the political dispensation didn't want Ronnie. Message was sent to Barbosa, will you take over as the chief? He says, no, I'll be the next to resign. So these were some very remarkable characters. That's what I'm trying to tell you. We can't, like I said, MHS will have to call me back for many more lectures again to be able to do a talk on all of these people. So I have just made a list of some of the doers and achievers. And Rao sir and Shekhawat sir, this list was made before you came, so it has nothing to do with your being in the audience today. But look at, I mean, see, Subra-Manyan in the submarine, he, first submariner of the country. The first submariner, you must regard that man like you would regard Neil Armstrong, right? He must have a hero status. He passed away about a month and a half ago. On the day he passed away, that Goofy Pentel and Sulochana, Ruby Mayers passed away. I have no disrespect towards these people. But the papers were full of these two people having passed away. What about India's first submariner? Wasn't his contribution? And ask any submariner, they'll tell you. I mean, Subra-Manyan, as he liked his name to be called, was a hard taskmaster. He was temperamental, but he gave his life to the submarine arm. So, point is, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a perfect list. A selective list. Asha ji will tell that there are very few technical officers. She had pulled me up once for that, and I agree, because I haven't studied enough. Technical officers haven't written enough. But the thing is, incomplete as this list is, and nobody is saying they were great. Some of them had imperfect family lives, some of them didn't achieve greatness in career, some of them, probably had health issues. But I am just putting in a list of various people who contributed in different fields. Look at something like maritime education and advocacy, and I am putting in lots of people's name there, because if you compare, the Navy of today has probably 25, 30, 50 PhDs against 1 or 2 50 years ago. And that talks of a Navy that's doing very well in the field of knowledge production or influencers, so advocacy. And recent names, Firdaus Mughal and Kuntal Wadhwar, young officers who showed bravery, put their lives on line. Unfortunately, both of them passed away. But they show us, what I'm trying to say is, this is continuous. In technical, please note I have put Ahluwalia, B.S. Ahluwalia, aviator. You may have views on his contribution, but I believe that it was 3 ex-officers, Ahluwalia, MP Anil Kumar and Mundakal, who in many ways made the Navy's network-centric warfare before it was taken up by others. So we may differ on this, but my point, ladies and gentlemen, is this, last 5 minutes, is that this is a Navy which has had lots of people who've done lots of things. And this picture of Abhilash Tomy being given a huge full frontal hug by the Navy Chief tells you about the connect, and please note that there was lots of, sort of slight WhatsApp gossip going around when Tommy was doing, is the Navy not supporting him, is the Navy not supporting him. Today's tweet by Tommy, today, he says, he said, someone tried to say, a boy from Kerala, he says, look, the credit for this should go to the Indian Navy. He has tweeted today. So, I recently, last couple of minutes, I recently spoke to an admiral, my contemporary, who's hard to please, extremely cynical, who I thought doesn't like anything about the. So I wanted a devil's advocate view from him, and he surprised me by saying this. He writes in Hindi, so I've corrected some part, but he says, "Agar हमारे सभी system या seniors खराब होते तो ये कैसा हुआ?" He's talking of all these, and mind you, ladies and gentlemen, I have seen this in my 36 years. Firefighting, for example, safety issues, military diplomacy. I've seen that get so much better in my time. And this is not, I'm not getting paid by the Navy to say good things about it. So this is not anything, this is frankly a study of Navy history and my experiences that says things are getting better. So often we have to do something called walk the talk. But there are some times when, as a big Navy, you have to talk the walk. And there are several times when the Indian Navy has done that. It has done that, I told you, when Peter Mahindru told Qatari that there can be only one captain on a ship. It has done that when Admiral Qatari sends that favorite signal, capture me a Portuguese frigate, please. Now, which was the Portuguese frigate captured? It was Afonso de Albuquerque. This was the man who set up the Portuguese Empire in India. So when you capture and hit a ship by that name, you have scored more than a victory. You have put a symbolic death knell into colonialism. But you must see that sort of symbolism. It was similarly said by lots of other people. It was said by I believe that when we had issues, Moor Island issues with Bangladesh, one of the Petias of one of the ships that went, and the Bangladeshi ship said, watch out, Indian Navy ship, you are in the wrong area and your navigation seems to be erratic. And the Indian Navy ship replied, it says that our navigation may or may not be erratic, but our gunnery is perfect. Or during Kargil war, when one of the the defense attaches, all Mysore commissioning, during Kargil war, defense attaches were called, and defense attache of a friendly country was also there. He walked past, he says, very good, good to see all ships are in harbour. Trying to say that all is peaceful. And the PRO, so everyone has to have that attitude. The PRO said, yes, very much, the ships are in harbour. And he said, but you will notice that the submarines are out. So these are the sort of things. You must have a sense of Admiral M.J. Singh as the fleet commander replying to, was it the American or British fleet, whatever, when they were asked in the North Arabian Sea, good morning Indian Navy, how long have you been here? And the Indian Navy's reply was, we have been here before Christ. What about you? Right? So you must, my point is, you must have that sense of destiny, sense of being the tiger, so to say. And none showed this better than two examples I take before I end of Vikrant. One was by Captain Swaraj Prakash, morning of 4th December. Remember, we remember 4th December for the attacks on Karachi. Morning of 4th December, we launched the attacks on what was then East Pakistan, with Gigi Gupta taking off the first at about 10 o'clock in the morning. At that point of time, there was a submarine alert. So the other ships, Kamorta and Beas and Brahmaputra, were sent to hunt for the submarine. And the aircraft carrier was left with Kavrati, and Kavrati had no sonar. I think Mike Bada sir is here, he will be able to bear it out. But they were told, now you have a problem, is it? You have a submarine threat, you don't know whether you should launch. And I understand that Swaraj Prakash was told by lots of people, including the fleet staff, that abort it, we'll come back later, see the result of that submarine thing. The submarine action was happening some distance away. And this is what Swaraj Prakash said. The foo of that time, Commander Vyas, says, I have not heard more sweeter or better things in my life than what Swaraj Prakash said then. The last instance I have not put here, ये भी विक्रांत में हुआ था और ये 71 वॉर में एडमिरल राव साहब ने ये इंस्टेंस भी बताया एक हमारे टॉक में, रिसेंट क्वार्टर डेक में भी आया है. 71 वॉर, इंजन रूम, द बॉयलर रूम ऑफ विक्रांत, राइट? तो नेवल चीफ आए हैं एडमिरल नंदा. एडमिरल नंदा इंस्पेक्ट कर रहे हैं, वो देख रहे हैं. एंड रिमेंबर विक्रांत वाज लिंपिंग देन. It had to be given a morale boost, and people were doing their job, and none more than the engine room department to get it ready for the war. And Nanda is very smart. He goes down to the engine room to check, get a pulse, and he speaks to the boiler room POME. And note, this is human psychology, and you got to hand it over to Nanda. He doesn't say कि आपका system कैसा है, अच्छा बेटा ये बताओ ये काम कर रहा है कि नहीं. He says, कैसे हो, ठीक हो, चिट्ठी आ रही है, हाँ साहब चिट्ठी आ रही है. Says, क्या लिखती है घरवाली? Okay, and look at the reply of this boiler room POME of ILS Vikrant in 71 war. That gentleman says, लिखती है, डाका जाओगे तो मलमल जरूर लेके आना. Now, how can you fight a navy which has this sort of morale, ladies and gentlemen? So my viewpoint is, when you talk of a big navy mindset, it is not about accommodation and this and that is good. It is about feeling that you belong to a big navy. And I believe that many people who are sitting here, particularly veterans, have brought us to the stage of being a good navy, a big navy, and it is for the rest of you to take it further. But I have not the slightest doubt. This doesn't mean that we have not made mistakes. This doesn't mean that we have not done anything wrong. This doesn't mean, like I said, my time constraints do not enable me to talk about what were the weak areas. We could discuss that at some other time. But on the whole, I think the Indian Navy has acquitted itself very well, and that's my study as a history maven. So thank you ever so much. Please shoot darts, shoot arrows. These are my contact details, Twitter handles, and recently we have started a bunch of us maritime enthusiasts have started a very small boutique thing called Maritime Knowledge Syndicate. That's the second Twitter handle. Some of my friends from the Maritime Knowledge Syndicate are here. Thank you for your presence. Thank you everyone, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. The lecture and the Q&A session was truly engaging. May I request Admiral Rajaram Swaminathan, Director General Naval Projects, to kindly come on stage and felicitate our invitational speakers.
Truly enthralling talk, and in the traditional naval style, I think we must give him a round of applause. Last few minutes, being a senior officer in the Navy, still serving, I'm reminded of a stand-up comedian who said that we are the sandwich generation. The seniors think we're fools, the youngsters think we're fools, and we're sandwiched in between the two.
Future. I will now hand over the proceedings to the MC for the evening to